Good afternoon to you. Welcome to this live broadcast of the National Assembly proceedings. On your screen is the second gate, which faces the KICC, and that is the gate that will be used by the Treasury Cabinet Secretary Ukur Yatani to access the precincts of Parliament this afternoon. It is a sitting that takes place once a year when the National Treasury and Planning make a public pronouncement of the budget highlights and revenue-raising measures for the national government for the financial year 2020-2021. This broadcast is brought to you by the Parliamentary Broadcasting Unit in conjunction with the Kenya Broadcasting Corporation. My name is Edward Kabasa. We'll take a look at the order of business this afternoon. Besides the address to Parliament by the Treasury Cabinet Secretary, the Poverty Eradication Authority Bill, National Assembly Bill number 13 of 2020 by the Honourable Member for Sirisia Constituency, Honourable John Waluke Koi, will be read for the first time. The principal object of this bill is to provide for an institutional framework that will promote and manage policies that combat poverty. And later, the National Treasury Cabinet Secretary Ukur Yatani will present in Parliament a 3.2 trillion shilling spending for the national and county governments in the 2020-2021 fiscal year starting July 1st. There is a rare footage of the Speaker of the National Assembly, Justin Muturi, walking to the chambers to oversee the business of the National Assembly this afternoon. It is a rare footage, and it is coming to you courtesy of the Parliamentary Broadcasting Unit. Now I will hand you over for this momentous broadcast where the National Treasury Cabinet Secretary, before 3 p.m., will be called upon to present to Parliament the 3.2 trillion shilling spending for the national and county governments for the fiscal year 2020-2021. My name is Edward Kabasa. Have a very good afternoon and enjoy your viewing.
Let us pray. Almighty God, who in your wisdom and goodness have appointed the office of leaders and parliaments for the welfare of society and the just government of the people, we beseech you to behold with abundant favor as your servants whom you've been pleased to court the performance of important trust in this republic. Let your blessings descend upon us here assembled, and grant that we treat and consider all matters that shall come under deliberation in so just and faithful a manner as to promote your honor and glory, and to advance the peace, prosperity, and welfare of our country and of those whose interests are committed to our charge. Amen. may start. Proceed.
Order number 1, administration of oath. Order number 2, communication from the chair.
Not now.
Order number 3, messages. Order number 4, petitions. Order number 5, papers.
Majority Whip.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker. Honorable Speaker, I beg to lay the following papers on the table of the House today, Thursday, 11th June 2020. List of nominees to fill vacancies in Nairobi Government Constituency Development Fund committees in the following constituencies. 1, Chuka Ikambangombe. 2, Embakasi Central. 3, Embakasi North. 4, Mgwen. 5, Emurua Dikir. 6, Garissa Township. 7, Kabuchai. 8, Kajiado East. 9, Kapenguria. 10, Kasarani. 11, Keyo South. 12, Kimilili. 13, Kinango. 14, Kisumu Central. 15, Kitutu Chache North. 16, Lamu East. 17, Lamu West. 18, Loima. 19, Mandera. Makadara. 20, Mandera South. 21, Mogotio. 22, Muhoroni. 23, Mwala. 24, Mwatate. 25, Nakuru Town East. 26, North Mugirango. 27, Nyakach. 28, Nyando. 29, Nyatike. 30, Ruaraka. 31, Sabatia. 32, Saku. 33, Starehe. 34, Subukia. 35, Suna East. 36, Wajia South. 37, Balambala. And 38, Garisen. B, Treasury Memorandum on Public Accounts Committee Report on National Government Accounts for the financial year 2016-2017 from the National Treasury. C, Legal Notice number 78 relating to the standards, verification of conformity to standards and other applicable regulations, Order 2020, and the explanatory memorandum from the Ministry of Industrialization, Trade and Enterprise Development. Thank you, Honorable Speaker.
Very well. The first is referred to the Public Accounts Committee, while the regulations are referred to the Committee on Delegated Legislation to process as appropriate. Next order.
Order number 6, notices of motion.
The Chairman, National Government CDF Select Committee, Honorable More. Your candidate is not sure. Yeah, now it's okay.
Honorable Speaker, I beg to give notice of the following motion that pursuant to the provisions of Section 43(4) and Regulation 510 of the National Government Constituency Development Fund 2015, this House approves the list of nominees for the appointment to the following constituency committees of the National Government Constituency Development Fund laid on the table of this House on Thursday, June the 11th, 2020. Chuka Igambangombe, Embakasi Central, Embakasi North, Mgwen, Emurua Dikir, Garissa Township, Kabuchai, Kajiado East, Kapenguria, Kasarani, Keio South, Kimilili, Kinango, Kisumu Central, Kitutu Chache North, Lamu East, Lamu West, Loima, Makadara, Mandera South, Mogotio, Muhoroni, Mwala, Mwatate, Nakuru Town East, North Mugirango, Nyakach, Nyando, Nyatike, Ruaraka, Sabatia, Saku, Starehe, Subukia, Suna East, Wajir South, Mbalambala, and Garisen. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Very well. Next order.
Order number 7, questions and statements.
First question by the member for Gilgit Town, Honorable Madha Wangari.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to ask question 52 of 2020 to ask to the Cabinet Secretary of Foreign Affairs. Number 1, could the Cabinet Secretary provide the circumstances that led to the arrest and detention of one John Boru Mwaura of identity card number 4276078 in the Republic of South Sudan? Number 2, could the ministry consider providing legal assistance to the said person with a view to ensuring his release? And number 3, could the Cabinet Secretary provide the number, identities, and other relevant details of other Kenyans imprisoned in the Republic of South Sudan and the reasons for their incarceration? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Question referred to the Departmental Committee on Defense and Foreign Relations. Next question by the member for Mumias East, the Honorable Benjamin Jomo Washiali.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker. Pursuant to the provisions of Standing Order number 42A(5), I rise to ask question number 056 of 2020 to the Cabinet Secretary for Transport, Infrastructure, Housing, Public Works, and Urban Development. 1, could the Cabinet Secretary explain why the construction of Ibokolo, Shianda, Malaha, Navakholo Road in Kakamega County, launched in 2016, has stalled? 2, could the Cabinet Secretary indicate when the said project or road is expected to resume and when it's expected to be completed? I thank you, Honorable Speaker.
Question referred to the Departmental Committee on Transport, Public Works, and Housing to be responded to. Next question is by the member for Kadhiani, the Honorable Robert Bue.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to ask question number 57 of 2020 to the Cabinet Secretary for Interior and Coordination of National Government. 1, could the Cabinet Secretary explain why an application regarding correction of the date of birth details on the national identity card by one Anne Moleli Saw of ID number 3125076, an elderly person from Kaani location in Kadhiani constituency, was rejected by the registrar? And 2, could the ministry consider facilitating the issuance of a new national identity card to the applicant, considering that he submitted all the requisite application documents to the National Registration Bureau as stipulated in the Registrar of Persons Act? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Question referred to the Committee on Administration and National Security to be responded to by the CS. The next question by the member for Tinderet, The Honorable Julius Melly.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker. Honorable Speaker, I rise to ask question number 058 of 2020 to the Cabinet Secretary for Transport, Infrastructure, Housing, Public Works and Urban Development. And the question is, could the Cabinet Secretary provide the status of the improvement to bitumen standards of Timboroa Meteitei Kopere Road in Nandi County? In Nandi and Kisumu County. 2, could the Cabinet Secretary explain the delays in the rehabilitation and construction of 23 kilometers Kebeneti, Addis Kericho border, Tindred Maraba Road, and state when the construction is expected to resume? I thank you, Honorable Speaker.
Very well. The question is referred to the Departmental Committee on Transport, Public Works and Housing to be responded to. The next question, being question number 024, was to be asked by the member for Kwale County, the Honorable Zuleika Hassan, who has requested for a deferment. You've come?
Yeah, I made it. I was on Mombasa Road. There was jam, but I'm coming from Kwale directly, but I made it then.
But you can see the efficiency of Parliament. The request had already been conveyed. Yeah. Proceed, Honorable Zuleika.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to ask question 024/2020 to the Cabinet Secretary for Water, Sanitation and Irrigation. 1, who are the direct beneficiaries of the water supply from Mwache Dam, which is to be constructed by the national government in Kwale County? Number 2, why were the residents of Kinango constituency, where the dam is located, not considered as priority beneficiaries? And could the ministry consider urgently providing water to the said residents? Number 3, when will the residents of Mwache area in Kwale County who were displaced to pave way for the construction of the dam by the national government be compensated for loss of land, crops, and other properties?
Very well. The question is referred to the Departmental Committee on Environment and Natural Resources to be responded to within the shortest time available. Next order. Were there requests for statements? Give to this one. Wangwe. Is that man? Huh? Let's go to the next order.
Order number 8, the Poverty Eradication Authority Bill, National Assembly Bill number 13 of 2020, first reading. A bill for an act of parliament to establish a Poverty Eradication Authority to provide for an institutional framework which ensures the participation of all Kenyans in poverty reduction and economic growth, and to provide for the coordination of the national economic empowerment and poverty eradication agenda and for connected purposes.
Next order.
Order number 9, motion. Approval of nominees for the appointment to constituency committees of the National Government Constituency Development Fund.
Chairman, Honorable More. Your card is not anywhere. Proceed.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that pursuant to the...
Sorry, Honorable More, the majority whip, we had already decided to do away with that particular... There's a small aspect of... we'll come back to you, Honorable More.
Okay.
Leader of majority.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And pursuant to the provisions of Standing Order 42, subsection 2A, I rise to give the following statement on behalf of the House Business Committee, which met today, Thursday, June the 11th, 2020, at 9:30 a.m. to prioritize the business for consideration. On Tuesday next week, Mr. Speaker, we will consider the Committee of Supply on the budget estimates of recurrent and development expenditure for the year ending 30th June 2021 in both the morning and afternoon sitting. It is our hope that we should conclude the Committee of Supply by the end of the afternoon sitting on Tuesday so as to pave way for the publication of the Appropriation Bill 2020 that ends the budget cycle for 2020-2021. The Speaker, it's also anticipated that the Departmental Committee on Finance and National Planning will table its report on the Finance Bill 2020 on Tuesday, June the 16th, 2020, and thereafter prioritize the bill for second reading on Thursday, June 18, 2020. And it's important for members to note that both the Finance Bill 2020 and the Appropriation Bill 2020 ought to be passed and ready for assent by His Excellency the President by the 30th of June 2020 in accordance with the provisions of the Public Finance Management Act 2012 as amended by the House last year. And it's for this reason that the House Business Committee has given priority for these bills to be considered before the end of the month. Mr. Speaker, within the same week, the House Business Committee has also set to consider two bills. One, the mediated version of the County Government Amendment Bill, Senate Bill number 11 of 2017, the mediated version of the County Government Amendment Bill, Senate Bill number 7 of 2017, as well as the second reading of the Refugee Bill 2019 and the Committee of the Whole House of the T-Bill, Senate Bill number 36 of 2018. Honorable Speaker, finally, the House Business Committee will reconvene on Thursday, 18th June 2020 to consider business for the coming week. I now wish to lay this statement on the table of the House, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
Very well. We proceed now with the motion by the Honorable Maore, but just to alert you that you will have, the motion has only a maximum of 8 minutes from now. Proceed.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that pursuant to the provisions of Section 43(4) and Regulation 510 of the National Government Constituency Development Fund 2015, this House approves the list of nominees for the appointment to the following 17 constituency committees of the National Government Constituency Development Fund laid on the table of this House on Thursday, June the 4th, 2020. 1, Bergut constituency, Bobazi constituency, Bomet Central constituency, Bumula constituency, Dagoretti North constituency, Galole constituency, Gem, Ijara, Isiolo North, Kabondo Kaspul, Kadui, Kiharu, Kilifi North, Ruiru, Samburu North, and Seme. Mr. Speaker, you will find that this is a lot that was presented on June the 4th, and we have been doing the approvals for the various constituency development boards, and we are behind the time we had sought for extension for the House to approve the boards that have been appointed or nominated by the various constituencies in the country. So, Mr. Speaker, it is not a complicated motion. The members that need to sit and approve the operations of those constituency development committees are needed urgently. And it is at this point, Mr. Speaker, I wish to state that we need these committees in place as quickly as possible so that those members or those constituencies can be able to utilize the funds that we are sending from Nairobi. Mr. Speaker, it is not, it's just like whereby the board has gone through the technical requirements for each and every member on different categories, and it is not complicated unless somebody from the floor can raise an objection to a specific constituency. Mr. Speaker, I would plead that this House does approve these 17 constituencies for the membership into those boards. And at this point, Mr. Speaker, I beg to move and seek to have a member of the committee second the motion, the Chief Whip, and then we can continue.
Honorable
Yes,
Wangwe.
Honorable Wangwe has been a member of this committee.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker. Honorable Speaker, I rise to second the motion as moved by the chair. Honorable Speaker, this being a list of members, list of committee members from various constituencies, they have already been checked, verified, and ascertained by the individual members from those constituencies, Honorable Speaker, who are also members of this House. Therefore, approving them will enable the various constituencies to enjoy the benefits that come along with the CDF from the various constituencies, Honorable Speaker. For that matter, I second.
Honourable members, I propose the question, which is that pursuant to the provisions of Section 43, subsection 4, and Regulation 5, subregulation 10 of the National Government Constituencies Development Fund 2015, this House approves the list of nominees for appointment to the following 17 constituency committees of the National Government Constituency Development Fund, laid to the table of the House on Thursday, June 4th, 2020. Constituencies being Belgut, Bobasi, Bomet Central, Bumula, Dagoretti North, Yalole, Gem, Ijara, Isiolo North Constituency, Kabondo Kaspul, Kadui, Kiharu, Kilifi North, Mwingi Central, Ruiru, Samburu North, and Seme Constituency. Is the desire of the House that I put the question? Members, I put the question that pursuant to the provisions of Section 43, subsection 4 of the and Regulation 5, subregulation 10 of the National Government Constituency Development Fund 2015, this House approves the list of the nominees for appointment to the 17 constituencies named on the order paper, laid on the table of the House on Thursday, June 4th, 2020. Will as many as that opinion say aye? Aye. Will as many as the contrary opinion say nay? The ayes have it. Just check if it's there. I can then make the communication. I'm reading this one. Yeah, let them come in. Honourable members, I wish to interrupt the business. As you are aware, on Tuesday, 9th of June 2020, this House approved the report of the Budget and Appropriations Committee on the budget estimates for the national government, the judiciary, and Parliament for the financial year 2020-2021. The next phase in the budget approval process will be consideration of the estimates in the Committee of Supply, which will allocate funds to various votes and programs for the respective three arms of the national government. Honourable members, as part of the process, before the supply phase is concluded, Section 40, Subsection 1 of the Public Finance Management Act 2012, read together with our Standing Order 244C, require the Cabinet Secretary for National Treasury to make a public pronouncement of the budget highlights and revenue-raising measures of the national government. It is for this reason that I will now interrupt the business of the House this afternoon, not later than 3 p.m., to allow the Cabinet Secretary for the National Treasury and Planning to discharge this obligation. However, honourable members, unlike the previous years and in keeping with the Speaker's guidelines on the conduct of plenary sittings during the COVID-19 pandemic period, issued on 2nd and 11th of April this year, you will note that today's event is unique as the House is unable to accommodate the usual invited guests and other dignitaries to witness the event live from our galleries. We have a few exceptions though. In this regard, I wish to recognize the few officials from the Ministry of National Treasury and Planning and other guests accompanying the Cabinet Secretary this afternoon. They are seated at the public servants' bench, the diplomatic boxes, and the Speaker's gallery. The officials include the Chief Administrative Secretary, National Treasury and Planning, the Honourable Nelson Gaishoye, the Principal Secretary, National Planning, Dr. Julius Muia, CBS, the Principal Secretary, National Treasury and Planning, Mr. Saitot Torome, the Principal Administrative Secretary, National Treasury and Planning, Mr. Amos Gadesha, amongst other officials and guests. They are welcome to the National Assembly this afternoon. Honourable members, Standing Order number 25A, paragraph A, provides that, and I quote, the Speaker may designate a suitable place in the chamber or at the bar of the House for the Cabinet Secretary responsible for finance to make a public pronouncement of the budget policy highlights and revenue-raising measures for the national government as contemplated under the Public Finance Management Act, close the quotes. Honourable members, in furtherance of this provision, I have designated a suitable place to the right of the Speaker's seat and adjacent to the public servants' benches to enable the Cabinet Secretary for the National Treasury discharge his obligation under Section 40 of the Public Finance Management Act 2012 and our Standing Order 244C of the National Assembly Standing Orders. It's now my pleasure, therefore, to invite the Cabinet Secretary for the National Treasury and Planning, the Honourable Ambassador Ukur Yatan, to make a public pronouncement of the budget highlights and revenue-raising measures for the national government for the financial year 2020-2021 and the medium term. Cabinet Secretary, Karibu.
Mr. Speaker, honorable members and fellow Kenyans, It's a great honor to present to this August House and to the country the highlights of the budget for the financial year 2020-21. I do this in performing my fiduciary duty and fulfillment of the requirements of Section 40 of the Public Finance Management Act 2012 and the Standing Order number 241 of the National Assembly. Mr. Speaker, at the outset, allow me to take this early opportunity to express my sincere gratitude to His Excellency the President of the Republic of Kenya, Honorable Uhuru Kenyatta, for appointing me to the position of the Cabinet Secretary for the National Treasury and Planning to provide leadership in the economic and financial affairs of the country. Mr. Speaker, allow me also to express my deep appreciation to the Chair and members of the Budget and Appropriation Committee, Finance and National Planning Committee, as well as the departmental committees of the National Assembly for their constructive engagement and support in the review of the financial year 2020-21 budget estimates and the financing measures. Mr. Speaker, in February 2020, we submitted to this House the 2020 budget policy statement. During that time, our financial projections assumed a normal operating environment. The economy was projected to grow by 6.1% in 2020, which was an improvement from 5.4% in 2019. Indeed, we had set on a conscious journey of fiscal consolidation, targeting a lower fiscal deficit of 6.3% of GDP in the financial year 2019-2020, 4.9% of GDP in 2020-21, and ultimately 3.0% of GDP over the medium term. This plan was premised on a strong revenue growth, reduction of non-core expenditures, and a gradual slowdown in the growth of the public debt. Mr. Speaker, you may recall that early in the year, this House considered our proposals and approved the economic and financial strategies in the 2020 budget policy statement. Mr. Speaker, the global outbreak and the rapid spread of the COVID-19 pandemic has led to the contraction of the global economy with disastrous consequences. The pandemic and the attendant containment measures aimed at saving lives have disrupted the business environment, including international trade, leading to loss of livelihood for millions of people globally. Mr. Speaker, Kenya has not been spared. Evidently, the pandemic and the swift containment measures, including the closure of the airspaces and borders, curfews and cessation of movements in some counties, among others, have not only disrupted our ways of lives and livelihoods, but to a great extent, business. These measures, including enforcement of basic hygiene and social distancing, were not only necessary but also timely, as they have indeed stemmed a surge of infections and loss of lives. In addition to the adverse effect of COVID-19 pandemic, our economy also experienced two other shocks. First, the massive invasion of swarms of desert locusts that damaged crops. Secondly, the floods that led to loss of lives and livelihoods, displacement of people, and destruction of infrastructure. Mr. Speaker, cognizant of the magnitude of the multiple challenges, particularly the COVID-19 pandemic, the government moved swiftly to intervene and implement a range of measures to mitigate against the adverse effects. Overall, these measures have provided the much-needed relief to the economy through injection of cash and provision of additional disposable incomes to the people and businesses. Mr. Speaker, the government also lowered the value-added tax rate from 16% to 14%, reduced tax rates from both corporate and 30% to 25%, and provided 100% tax relief for persons earning a gross monthly income of up to 24,000 Kenya shilling. Further, in order to support the micro, small, and medium enterprises, the turnover tax rate was lowered from 3% to 1%. To support the economy, the government instituted various monetary policy measures to enhance credit access by the private sector at an affordable cost. This was achieved through introduction of central bank rates from 8.25% to 7%, and lowering of the cash reserve ratio requirement from 5.2% to 4.25%. Consequently, this intervention released Kenya shilling 35 billion to commercial banks, allowing them flexibility with regard to requirements for loan classification and disposition. Indeed, since March 2020, banks have restructured loans in excess of Kenya shilling 360 billion, including Kenya shilling 190 billion of personal loans. Further, Mr. Speaker, listing with the credit reference bureaus of any person micro, small, and medium enterprises, and corporate entities whose loan account falls overdue or is in arrears was temporarily suspended. In addition, in order to enhance liquidity for business, the government provided Kenya shilling 13.1 billion to settle verified pending bills owed by ministries and departments, and a further Kenya shilling 10 billion for payment of verified VAT refund claims. Mr. Speaker, to cushion the vulnerable in our society, particularly the emerging urban vulnerable, the government provided an additional Kenya shilling 10 billion to boost the ongoing traditional current cash transfer program. Similarly, the government allocated Kenya shilling 1 billion to recruit health workers to strengthen the health capital capacity of the Ministry of Health, while allocating Kenya shilling 400 million for food and non-food commodities for affected households. Mr. Speaker, the government also established the COVID-19 Emergency Response Fund to receive voluntary contribution from well-wishers towards defraying expenses associated with this pandemic. Mr. Speaker, in order to gainfully engage our youth, the government rolled out the Kazi Mtaani program designed to improve public hygiene standards and undertake urban civil works. Already, 26,000 youth are engaged in the pilot phase. To further cushion citizens and business from the adverse effects of COVID-19 pandemic and to stimulate economic activity going forward, His Excellency the President, on May 23, 2020, unveiled an 8-point economic stimulus program. I'll be elaborating on the economic stimulus program later in my statement. Mr. Speaker, over the last few months, revenue collections shrank considerably due to slowed economic activities attributed to COVID-19 pandemic. Conversely, there was a rise in public expenditures to address the targeted interventions. In light of this, the government reached out to the multilateral and bilateral development partners for additional funding. Indeed, the response from the development partners was prompt and also generous. A number of them provided assistance in form of grants and highly concessional funds and personal protective equipment. Mr. Speaker, allow me to highlight some of the significant financial assistance that Kenya has received from multilateral partners. First, the country received Kenya shilling 78.3 billion under the Rapid Credit Facility of the International Monetary Fund to help address the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. This financial support is fully concessional at zero interest rate. Second, we received Kenya shilling 108 billion from the World Bank under the second development policy operation as both budgetary support and extra resources to help fight the pandemic. At the initial phase of the COVID-19 outbreak, the World Bank extended support of Kenya shilling 6.8 billion under the contingency emergency response to the Ministry of Health for prompt preparation and response. Mr. Speaker, the government has also received Kenya shilling 22.5 billion from the African Development Bank as a concessional loan, an additional Kenya shilling 7.5 billion commitments from the European Union in form of grants. With this support, Mr. Speaker, will not only strengthen our healthcare systems with the requisite equipment, supplies, and medical personnel to respond to the pandemic, but also fund other critical interventions in the budget. We express our sincere gratitude to our bilateral development partners and multilateral institutions for standing with us during this challenging time. Mr. Speaker, the financial year 2020-21 budget responds to the current challenges facing Kenyans, businesses, and the economy at large in the wake of COVID-19 pandemic. It's in this context that we have chosen the theme for this budget as stimulating the economy to safeguard livelihoods, jobs, businesses, and industrial recovery. The theme underscores our determination to protect lives and livelihoods and cushion vulnerable citizens against the adverse effects of COVID-19. This is further expected to create and protect jobs, stimulate industrial growth, and ultimately steer economic recovery. Mr. Speaker, to sustain efforts towards the full recovery of the economy, the government is currently developing a post-COVID-19 economic recovery strategy under the leadership of His Excellency the President. The strategy will not only accelerate economic recovery, but is designed to provide a roadmap for transition to a new development framework beyond the current Vision 2030. Mr. Speaker, allow me now to highlight the economic policy context in which this budget has been prepared. Mr. Speaker, in framing this budget, we have taken into account recent economic developments on the global and domestic scene. The budget was prepared against a background occasioned by the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic, which has disrupted most aspects of human life. Indeed, most world economies remain on lockdown. As a result, in April 2020, the IMF projected that the world economy will experience negative growth rate of 3% in 2020. This is worse than the growth rate reported during the 2008 and 2009 financial crisis. However, on a positive note, world economic growth is projected to rebound to 5.8% in 2021. Mr. Speaker, overall, economic growth in advanced economies is projected to contract by 6.1% in 2020, while that of emerging and developing countries, including China, India, Russia, and Brazil, is expected to contract by 1% in 2020. Equally, economies in sub-Saharan Africa region are projected to contract by 1.6% in 2020 before a rebound to grow by 4.1% in 2021. Mr. Speaker, in addition to the adverse effects of the COVID-19 pandemic, the Kenyan economy is confronted by the impact of desert locusts and floods that have caused deaths, displacement, and destruction of infrastructure across the country. From these three simultaneous shocks, all sectors of the economy have been adversely affected. Agricultural sector, for example, has been hit hard by the low global demand for agricultural products, especially horticulture, tea, and coffee, among others. Further, the reduction in availability of raw materials and intermediate goods following closure of international borders has negatively affected the manufacturing sector. Mr. Speaker, taking into account the impact of these shocks on the domestic economy, growth is now projected at a lower rate of 2.5% in 2020, down from 5.4% growth recorded in 2019. Moving forward, so as to boost economic activities and foster higher, as I mentioned earlier, our chosen fiscal consolidation plan has been adversely affected by the events over the last 6 months. In this respect, we are now targeting a fiscal deficit of 8.3% of GDP in financial year 2019-2020, from the previous target of 6.3% of GDP. In the financial year 2020-21, the fiscal deficit is targeted at 7.5% of GDP and is expected to improve to 6.1% of GDP in financial year 2021-22. Mr. Speaker, having outlined the economic policy context for this budget, the rest of my statement will outline specific measures aimed at stimulating the economy so as to safeguard livelihoods, including jobs, businesses, and facilitate faster industrial recovery. I will thereafter present a fiscal framework that sets out the resource envelope underpinning this budget and enumerate spending priorities. Finally, I'll provide highlights of tax and other policy measures that we are proposing to support economic recovery. Mr. Speaker, in addition to the recent shocks experienced by the economy, we are still confronted by the perennial challenges of high incidence of poverty and unemployment, frequent droughts, low agricultural and industrial productivity, inadequate decent housing, growing demands for high investment in the health sector, inadequate revenue, and other forms of financing and governance-related issues. Mr. Speaker, these challenges, including the devastating effects of COVID-19 pandemic, require bold actions if we are to position our country on a sustainable economic growth trajectory. Through this budget, therefore, Mr. Speaker, our focus will be, first, to roll out an economic stimulus program that will catalyze economic activity, provide livelihoods to Kenyans, and enable businesses to recover from the adverse effects of COVID-19 pandemic. I will shortly enumerate the various initiatives under their funding. Second, maintaining macroeconomic stability to support long-term investments, economic growth, and development. Towards this end, we aim to strike an appropriate balance between support for economic recovery and continued fiscal discipline. This will be achieved through effective coordination of fiscal, monetary, and financial policies to lower the cost of living and doing business. Mr. Speaker, whereas Kenya's public debt remains sustainable, we need to be cautious about future debt accumulation. Our focus, therefore, will be to strengthen management of public debt to minimize costs and risk of the portfolio. while accessing external concessional funding to finance development projects. Further, Mr. Speaker, I reiterate that security of our people, property and investments remain key. In this regard, I'll be proposing allocation of funds to strengthen our security and investigative agencies. This is because a secure and conducive business environment will attract foreign direct investment that is necessary for economic recovery. Third, to support the recovery and growth of micro, small, and medium enterprises through various interventions, including operationalization of the Credit Guarantee Scheme. Mr. Speaker, to further expand opportunities for local enterprises and micro, small, and medium enterprises, we shall gazette and enforce the list of items for local procurement to promote the Buy Kenya, Build Kenya initiative. Fourth, to continue supporting implementation of the Big Four agenda. In this regard, therefore, Mr. Speaker, I will later in this statement be proposing allocations to the drivers and enablers of the Big Four agenda. Fifth, enhance allocations to support development of critical infrastructure in the country, such as roads, rail, energy, and water, among others, so as to reduce the cost of doing business, as well as promote competitiveness. Sixth, increase resources to support the youth, women, and persons with disability to enable them actively contribute to economic recovery agenda. Seven, to scale up resource allocation to improve access to education, strengthen healthcare systems, and enhance cash transfers to support the vulnerable members of our society. Eighth, continue to facilitate county governments in strengthening their system to enhance service delivery. In this respect, I urge county governments which have not completed paying verified pending bills or to various suppliers to do so expeditiously. And ninth, implement various structural reforms to enhance the efficiency of public service delivery while at the same time ensuring accountability for sustained macroeconomic and fiscal stability, better credit ratings, improve fiscal discipline, and minimize corruption. Mr. Speaker, allow me at this point to elaborate on the 8-point economic stimulus program that the government will be implementing to stimulate and sustain economic activities. I will thereafter briefly highlight plans for developing the post-COVID-19 economic recovery strategy, which is linked to the post-2030 vision. Mr. Speaker, the 8-point economic stimulus program targets to cushion vulnerable citizens and businesses, particularly those affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. The stimulus program will focus on keeping the food supply chains functional while promoting the use of locally produced goods and services, thus securing the livelihoods of daily wage earners. Mr. Speaker, we have set aside Kenya shilling 56.6 billion to cater for the various thematic areas of the program. Mr. Speaker, in the first theme covers the infrastructure and is designed to rehabilitate road networks across the country as a direct response to the damages occasioned by the recent heavy rains. The rehabilitation of access roads and footbridges will optimize the use of local labor and materials, thereby generating short-term employment for thousands of youth. Towards this end, I propose to allocate Kenya shilling 5 billion for rehabilitation of the damaged access roads and footbridges. Further, Mr. Speaker, to address the issue of youth unemployment and empowerment in urban informal settlement, I have set aside Kenya shilling 10 billion under the Kazi Mtaani program. This Kazi Mtaani program will be targeting unemployed youth in the major cities and urban settlements of Nairobi, Mombasa, Kisumu, Eldoret, Nakuru, and other major towns. The youth will be engaged in fumigation, stormwater drainage works, cleaning of markets and informal settlements, rehabilitation and maintenance of access roads, footbridges and footpaths, and other environmental management activities. The Kazi Mtaani program targets to employ at least 200,000 youth. Mr. Speaker, the second theme seeks to improve education outcomes in the country. The objective is to get thousands of unemployed teachers and into action as intern teachers, while also supporting local artisans and builders' businesses. To meet this commitment, Kenya's 7.4 billion has been proposed. Mr. Speaker, out of these, Kenya shilling 2.1 billion will go to construction of additional classrooms in secondary schools. shilling 1.9 billion for provision of at least 250,000 locally fabricated desks for secondary and primary schools. Shilling 700 million for capitation and improvement of infrastructure in low-cost boarding schools in arid and semi-arid lands using local labor. Shilling 2.4 billion for recruitment of 10,000 intern teachers to support the 100% transition schools, and shilling 300 million for recruitment of 1,000 ICT interns to support digital learning in public schools. Mr. Speaker, the third theme targets to support micro, small, and medium enterprises. Despite their important contribution, this sector has continued to. Mr. Speaker, in order to de-risk lending to the micro, small, and medium enterprise, I have set aside shilling 3 billion seed capital to operationalize the credit guarantee scheme. The scheme will enable the provision of affordable credit in an efficient and structured manner. In addition to this, we are also actively engaging a number of development agencies who have shown willingness to put in additional resources to support this scheme. Mr. Speaker, to further support and enhance the liquidity of these enterprises, I propose to fast-track payment of outstanding verified VAT refund claims and pending bills owed to businesses by allocating shilling 10 billion. This is in addition to the shilling 23.1 billion approved by this House in April 2020 in the supplementary budget for the same purpose. Mr. Speaker, the fourth theme prioritizes improvement in health outcomes. Evidently, the COVID-19 pandemic has overstretched our healthcare system. The government has made significant efforts to contain the spread of the virus through various protocols and containment measures, which entail promotion of hygiene and restriction of movements. Mr. Speaker, building on these measures in a way that ensures more Kenyans are gainfully engaged and support local industries, and to further enhance capacity of the healthcare system, shilling 1.2 billion is proposed for the recruitment of an additional cohort of 5,000 healthcare workers to support local health staff for a period of 1 year. This will enhance our COVID-19 response capabilities and strengthen implementation of the Universal Health Coverage Program. Mr. Speaker, we have also allocated an additional shilling 500 million to supply 20,000 locally made beds and beddings to public hospitals, and shilling 25 million to support the establishment of 50 modern walk-through sanitizers at our border points and main hospitals across the country. Mr. Speaker, the fifth theme will focus on agriculture and food security. I have set aside shilling 3 billion to subsidize the supply of farm inputs through the e-voucher system to reach 200,000 small-scale farmers. I have also allocated shilling 3.5 billion for expanded community household irrigation. These will caution farmers from the adverse effects of weather and further secure food supply chains. Further, Mr. Speaker, I have set aside shilling 1.5 billion to assist flower and horticultural farmers to access international market during this period when we experience cargo traffic in and out of the country. These interventions will support and sustain the farming communities as they will provide employment to thousands of workers in our agricultural sector. Mr. Speaker, the sixth theme for the program is to support the tourism sector. Tourism is one of the worst hit sectors by the pandemic. This is reflected by massive cancellation of hotel bookings occasioned by lockdown and travel bans imposed by various countries in an effort to minimize the spread of the virus. The resultant effect has been massive job and income losses by many Kenyans directly and indirectly employed in the tourism sector. In this regard, Mr. Speaker, to support this critical sector, the government has initiated a number of urgent measures, including a temporary lifting of the ban to hold meetings in private hotels by government agencies. The government has also waived landing and parking fees at our airports in order to facilitate movement of cargo in and out of Kenya. Going forward, Mr. Speaker, the government will scale up efforts to boost the tourism sector by promoting aggressive post-COVID-19 tourism marketing and providing support for hotel refurbishment through soft loans to be channeled through the Tourism Finance Corporation. Shilling 3 billion has been set aside to support renovation of facilities and the restructuring of business operations by actors in this industry. Mr. Speaker, the government will also provide grants to 101 billion to support flood control using local labor in the most affected areas. I have also set aside Kenya shilling 850 million to cater for rehabilitation of wells, water pumps, and other